Welcome to Renegade Thinkers Unite, featuring the sharpest minds in marketing, inspirational case histories, and weekly insights you can apply to your business. Find out why top CMOs rank this podcast among their favorites. Now, here's your host, Chief Marketing Renegade, Drew Nizer.
In an ongoing effort to bring more renegade thinking to Renegade Thinkers Unite, this show is being recorded in front of a live audience, thanks to our friends at Zoom, and not just any random off-the-street audience, but an elite collection of B2B chief marketing officers. Now, that should definitely keep both my guest and me on our toes, as this esteemed group will be able to throw in their questions along the way. So for this special occasion, Gartner's Brent Adamson has agreed to be on the show for the third episode, which, by the way, Brent, you can see this. That earns you a Renegade Saw. It's sort of like the Saturday Night Live a jacket for being on for 5 times. So congratulations. Awesome.
Yeah, Can I take that through security at the airport, though? That's what I want to know.
Absolutely. It's got a little bindy thing on the razor. I'm sure they won't mind. Okay. So, by the way, if you missed the earlier episodes with Brent, 89 and 90 are must listens. Brent is a distinguished, I love that, distinguished vice president. How do I get that title? Distinguished Vice President Gartner, and also the co-authors of The Challenger Sale and The Challenger Customer, 2 books that I believe and many believe are must-reads for B2B marketers. And if those past episodes were Modern Marketing 101, we're going to be moving into a graduate level exploration of Brent's research and recommendations. So Brent, welcome to the show again.
Thank you, Drew. It's great to be with you.
So what's new in your world? I feel like we should be playing Where's Brent instead of Where's Waldo, given your travel schedule.
Well, I'm really, this time of year, I'm all over the place. So one of the things, as you know, is this being the beginning of the calendar year, it's also sales kickoff season. So big B2B sales organizations all over, so certainly all over North America, make what I call the Great Migration to Orlando, where they all go down and do the 3 days of award ceremonies and planning for the coming year. We do a lot of speaking at those kinds of meetings. So I'm doing a lot of traveling there. I was just in London this week for our Digital Leader Academy conference in London, which turned out to be fantastic. A lot of great research for B2B and B2C marketers. But if you need to know where I'm at, it's probably row 12, seat C somewhere.
Very cool. All right. Well, we're delighted that your plane landed, because when we were texting, when we were emailing yesterday, it was at 35,000 feet. So the last time I saw you, we were in Vegas, I think it was last October, and you had just scared the crap out of a group of CMOs by asking them if any of them had started preparing for the recession. You could have heard the room went quiet. It was like you were suddenly, Ned Stark saying winter is coming. It was pretty, it was pretty dark. But not to start on a downer, but are you still expecting a recession in the next 12 months?
Well, everything that we're looking at and all of our data says, somewhere across the next 2 years, by end of 2020 at the latest, the likelihood of recession goes up to nearly 100% from the data from our chief prognosticator, as I like to call him, a really smart guy. Now, there's nothing to say that this is 2008 all over again. There's nothing in our data, I think anyone else's for that matter. This is we're heading for a cliff. It is for those of us old enough to remember them, it's like one of those normal recessions, right? At some point, gravity takes over and things soften up, and we all have to tighten our belts and think about sort of a little bit more care and precision in the choices we're making, particularly when it comes around budgeting, but timing as well, and resources and efficiency. And I think that time is, one could argue, by the way, that time should always be it should always be the time for that, right? But things get, when you go through a booming period like we have over the last couple of years, it's easy to let that kind of discipline slip. And I think we're heading now, whenever that recession comes, or that downturn, or whatever you'd like to call it, I think we are certainly at a point now where we should all begin to think about, probably now's the time to begin to build some of that discipline back in.
Yeah, I was with a group of CMOs down in DC and asked them how many of their CFOs are sort of anticipating recession, and are they starting to see this happen? Yeah. And most of the hands went up, and I've seen research that say 9 out of 10 CFOs believe that a recession is imminent. And so they're already planning. So, they're looking at budgets and headcounts and things. And I don't know, for me, the one thing I expect to see is there's been this massive growth of internal in-house resources, which always sort of happen when you're go, go, go. And then suddenly headcount's going to be a big issue. So I suspect it will be the typical, hey, CMO, do more with less, and that's less budget, less headcount, less tech. I mean, and that's the sort of the way these things always work. But
Drew, actually, real quick on that point, if I may, because there's something that's just occurred to me as I was thinking through this, is that in some ways, I think this is going to actually be harder than it's been in the past. So, say for example, in the past you had 10 creatives on your team, and you've got to reduce your team by 20-30%. So maybe you let 2 or 3 of them go, and it's a hard decision, no question. But it's instead of having 10 creatives, maybe I have 7. But in the world we live in now, as you think about the way that marketing has evolved over the last 5-10 years, particularly in the last 5, with the advent of data and AI and technology and data analytics and all the other social, of course, is much older story. But if you think about the diversity of a marketing staff today versus the diversity of a marketing staff, say 10 years ago, and now tell me to cut 10 people when I have one person on each of 10 very different roles, that's a totally different equation. And I think it's going to force marketers into having to play some big bets, not just on people, but big bets on initiatives and priorities around where do they want to focus. When I guess, do I stop doing data analytics altogether? I think all of us would say, no, you can't do that. But then, I only had one person on that, and I got to reduce my headcount. What do I do? And it's going to be tough, I think, for us. And so it's a good thing to start thinking about these things now. I think.
No, it's really true. And if you think about some of these companies that have 28 different technologies in their MarTech stack, and there's people attached to all of those, you're absolutely right. And that was one of the sort of, I think, the bigger surprises for a lot of folks is that when they did take this MarTech on, they had to add people. So anyway, let's get to Challenger Customer. In our first interview, it was very funny. You avoided defining marketing almost like you wanted to blow up the whole idea of marketing and the traditional organizational structure. It's like, and then at Vegas, you talked about the convergence of sales and marketing, 40% of the pipeline being driven by marketing and 80% of the purchase decisions completing before, sales are even in the picture. And so I almost got the sense that you were thinking marketing that these departments should sort of go away. We should have something called smarketing, and there's just one department. Is that a fair interpretation of your real thinking here?
Probably, I don't know. Fair. It's probably fair. I just don't know if it's accurate. But but to be totally honest, I'm not really sure where my personal and our collective thinking is on this right now. And what I mean by that is, what we're seeing in our data just raises all sorts of really tough questions that we honestly don't have clear answers on, which I know is not very effective or helpful. My friends at Grainger used to call this teaching your customer into the desert. It's like you raise a really tough problem and they say, what do I do? And say, I don't know. Good luck with that, right? But but I think the thing that's so interesting is, and in fact, I was just downstairs with our research team about an hour ago talking about this, is that over the years, for all sorts of good reasons, marketing has been coupled with digital and sale, the digital channel, what we do on our website through digital channels. And that's really been the domain of marketing, among other things, of course, brand and all the other stuff. But, when you think digital, you think marketing, think digital. At the same time, sales has been largely that's the domain of in-person customer interactions. So you got marketing equals digital, sales equals in-person. And then we have this additional dimension, which is digital is largely seen as something that happens early in a sale or a purchase. So we engage customers through digital, we nurture them, we drip them, we qualify them, and at some point we pass them over to sales for an in-person interaction. So it's sales equals in-person, marketing equals digital equals early, and in-person equals late. And the problem is when you come at this at least as we've come at it from our research and looking at buying, the whole thing starts to fall apart, not because we started studying sales and marketing, but rather because we started studying buying. And what you find is that customers largely are, for lack of a better word, perhaps rather agnostic as to whether they learn through digital channels or in-person channels. And in fact, agnostic may not be the right way to put it. In fact, the more accurate would be they're heavy users of both digital and in-person channels to gather information, one, and two, that gathering of that information through both of those channels happens effectively in parallel rather than in serial fashion. So it's not that there's digital early and in-person late. It's essentially, with not to overstate it, but nearly always on digital interactions with a supplier and always on, or at least often on interactions through sales reps. There's not very many of those interactions we get with sales reps, but there's nothing to say that they have to be late or they have to be early. We're finding some really interesting things on that right now in our data. And so once you overlay the functional structure of marketing and sales on top of that dynamic, what happens is that our organizational structures force us into this: marketing owns digital, sales owns in-person, digital's early, sales is late, or in-person is late, and that's just not the way buying actually happens. And so what does that mean? Well, it's like, well, if we were to reverse engineer or to reverse back solve from how buying actually happens, one would imagine that we'd actually solve not for marketing or sales, which is effectively your question, but rather we'd solve for information. So what is the information that our customers need most and most urgently to make a buying decision? Oftentimes information they didn't even know they needed. And then once we figure out what that information looks like, we package it, we present it, or we put it together in the right way, which is something we spend a lot of time talking about these days. Then we deliver it through multiple channels simultaneously so that customers can access that information through digital or through in-person. They can do it early, they can do it late, they can do it parallel, they can do it simul. It's just, and that's just like, so what does that do with the sales and marketing functional divide is a really interesting question, because we're literally just not set up to work in that way. And I think, so there's two answers to this. One is more of a workaround. So what's the workaround to make that happen? We've seen some cool organizational evolutions or innovations to do that. And then there's this much bigger question, which gets all the way now back to your original question, which is like, so what's the like long-term organizational structural answer to that? And the answer is, I'm not sure. I was talking to a CMO just last week, whose name is Joelle, and she said, look, I think you guys are spot on with your analysis, but what you're recommending is essentially never going to happen. It's like, that's just so beyond the pale of, so you can't go in and drop a bomb on organizational structure and say, hey, it's marketing. I think if you're a small startup, in fact, we've seen this in real life, right? But if you're a large enterprise, it's just asking too much. It's too disruptive, and it's too risky, and it's too disruptive. And so we're still working on that, to be honest. But I think that's why it's important that we discuss it.
So the central premise of your book, and I think this will set up that is that buying is broken, and that in the B2B companies as a result, and so if you're a marketer and you don't recognize that buying is broken, you're going to have this problem. So when you talk about 5.4 members on a team, by the way, who is that 0.4 guy? I mean, is that a part? Oh, and by the way, is that number still accurate?
No, it's not even close. So
okay.
The number 5.4 came from work we'd done, I guess about 6 years ago or so now. When we went out, we started serving B2B customers. These are individual stakeholders involved in a large, complex business-to-business purchase, a solutions purchase of some kind. And when we simply asked all those people we were surveying, just how many people are involved in the purchase decision in your organization, and then you do the averages and all that kind of stuff, it came out at 5.4, which does raise this question, who's the 0.4? It also gets us accused sometimes of false precision. But the 0.4 is, in my mind, actually is kind of a real thing, right? Because it's that person that's in, then they're out, then they're in, then they're out. It's like, are you part of this or you're not, right? So which is actually, you can, gosh knows, with all my travel, I'm a 0.4 father sometimes. So it's a totally different story for a different time. But the thing, though, that's interesting is as we continue to ask that question, we continue to study that question year over year, that number's gone up. And it hasn't just gone up, it's gone up quickly and dramatically. So it went from 5.4 to 6.8, to, I guess that person got more involved, to 9, to the point where it actually, literally last spring, when we got an average back just somewhere between 9 and 10, our chief research officer, a good friend of mine named Eric, just said, I don't know if I trust your guys' methodology anymore. There's no way this number could be going up that fast. And so now we report it as a range of 6 to 10. And yet when I travel around the world and show that number to chief sales officers, they'll tell me that you're way too low. That it's actually much higher than that. And we've actually developed now almost what I call an era analysis, ERA, so like time period analysis of why are there so many people, when did they enter into the purchase decision, and why does that number keep growing? And what you'll find is every 2 or 3 years, there's another or additional reason why more people get added into the purchase decision, whether it be the risk aversion that was dumped into our environments in 2008, 2009 when the economy went off a cliff, whether it's the integration of all of our solutions into some sort of technological capability, including mobile. And the thing we're seeing now, of course, is data protection. With good reason, everybody today is worried about protecting data. Who owns the data? Is it in the cloud? Who stores it? Who's responsible for it? I don't want to wind up on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. But because of all those legitimate fears, now you're seeing in buying groups things like data compliance people and legal playing a very different role. And so there's all sorts of new individuals at the table, all with legitimate questions, but slowing everything down, not just for the supplier trying to sell to them, but for the customers themselves just trying to make decisions on what they're trying to do.
So this is mind-boggling. I need to take a break because if I'm contemplating selling to 10 different individuals with 10 different needs, I need to think about that. So we're going to take a break and we're going to come right back. Did you know that Renegade Thinkers Unite was ranked number 2 of the top 10 podcasts for CMOs by Crackerjack Marketing? Wow, we're really honored. Now, we couldn't do that without amazing guests, and we've had some amazing CMOs on this show, and also terrific listeners like you all. If you like what we do here, please subscribe on your favorite podcast player. That way, you'll never miss an episode. Also, as a special thanks, I'd like to send you a free ebook on Renegade Thinkers. Now, for that, just email drew@renegade.com. Now let's get back to the show. Okay, we have 10 people on this buying committee, and that the first instinct, and I hear this a lot, is that, well, they're very different people, the CFO versus the CISO versus the legal guy and so forth, and therefore you need to have 10 different, even sort of almost campaigns and messages to meet those individual needs. But I believe your research suggests that's suboptimal. That doesn't really work right.
You know, it's funny. I think in many ways there's just a broad appreciation, whether it's our research or anyone else's just normal everyday experience. There's a broad appreciation for this problem, this challenge of more people involved. And in some ways, while it's not causative, there's a correlative relationship between this and the rise of account-based marketing. Right? It's like I need to understand that account more deeply than ever before possible, and I got to understand who all these people are and what they care about, and build personas and tailor or personalized messages to each one of them. And this is where marketers start pulling out their hair, right? I mean, irrespective of data and personalization and everything else, it's just like, even if I keep it at the segment or persona level, it's like, wow, if there's 5-10 people and I got to figure out what each one cares about and personalize my message to each one of them, that's just kind of overwhelming. But the weird thing is, in our research, we found, this is chapter 1 of the Challenger Customer. When we studied this very question, like, how do I do that? How do I personalize to all these stakeholders? We were kind of blown away and frankly somewhat terrified, because it ran directly in the face of some of the conclusions from book 1. But to find that, in a nutshell, simply, the better and better you get at tailoring or customizing the value of your offer to each individual stakeholder, the less likely you are to actually win what we call a high-quality deal. And the better you get at it, the worse things become. Go ahead.
Wow.
Wait,
okay,
what?
so I know, right. Wait, what? So
that was exactly our reaction too.
Right. I'm going to pause because I want to emphasize this for the listeners out there. So you have 5 verticals, you have 10 personas, and then you tailor a message to each of those, and that's less effective.
Yeah.
Okay. So what's the alternative?
Well, first of all, I think we got to talk very briefly about why. It's like, why in the world would that be a bad thing to do? And so that leads into the alternative, which is, the reason why we had to stare at this for a long time. In fact, the first thing you do when you get these kinds of numbers back from the quantitative research team is you tell them to rerun the numbers. And we did that 10 times and it wouldn't go away. So it's like, okay, we got to embrace this, figure out what's going on. And ultimately the conclusion we came to, both in the data and then just talking to sales and marketing leaders around the world, is that it's not just a numbers problem, either whether it's 5 or 6 or 10, it's a big number. It's a lot of people. But the problem really, the underlying problem is not just that it's a big group, but it's a diverse group. It's the fact that each one of those individual stakeholders represents a different function, a different geography, a different level, a different altitude, different set of priorities and agenda. And so what happens when those individuals collectively come together to make a group decision, the first thing they're going to do, we know this from just broad-based group psychology studies, well beyond anything we do at Gartner, the first thing that group is going to do, the dynamic, is let's seek common ground. What can we all agree on? What's the first thing that we can all agree on? And it turns out that in a very diverse group, where as we like to say, the mental models tend to have very little overlap, because it's not that they're in conflict per se. It's just that legal cares about something totally different than IT cares about something totally different than marketing. So when they look for common ground, what common ground they can find, Drew? It'd be things like, let's be cautious. Let's slow things down. Let's save some money. Let's pull back. Let's study this more. And so we call this lowest common denominator buying, where the natural outgrowth of this kind of dynamic is to fall back on these very simple deals with either short pilot cycles or just study it more and things stall out altogether. And so if you're a supplier selling big complex solutions into this environment, and you're trying to sell that bigger, what we call a high quality deal, a bigger solution with the higher scope, the higher margin, what we found is the thing you're up against is not the fact that you can't talk to each of these individuals and appeal to each of these individuals. It's the fact that they can't connect with each other. They can't find common ground beyond simply do as little as possible and reduce risk as much as we can. So the ultimate idea here is that when we think about the material, the content, the messages that we produce for our stakeholders, better than, as marketers, we ought to think, how do we do we always think, how do we do a better job of connecting those individual stakeholders to me, to us, to our brand, to our value proposition? But the better way to think about it, we think, is, and this is really where we go into a lot of depth in the book on this, is how do we do a better job, not of connecting those individual stakeholders to us, but how do we do a better job of connecting those individual stakeholders to each other, to help them find common ground well beyond and above and what they might have left to their own devices.
So, right. So buyers are broken. They don't, too many people. So as a marketer though, so let's drill down. So we've got to find some kind of common story for the brand that you can
No, hold on. I can stop you. I'm sorry, Drew. I apologize. I interrupted. We need to find a common story for the customer.
For the customer. Common story for the customer.
That story is not about you, the supplier. It's not about your brand. It's not about it's a common story for the customer, something that they're doing or could be doing. And it's so fundamentally different than what you suggest. I had to stop you. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, please. Give us an example.
This is kind of the heart and soul of everything that we've written about in the Challenger books, the Challenger sale and the Challenger customer, is that this is what we call insight, or specifically commercial insight. And I'll come back to the word commercial in a second. But the content that we need to produce to make this magic happen effectively is not content about us and who we are and how we help and what we do, which is what we all produce and put on our websites, but rather content about not our organization, but the customer's organization. Help them understand their business better than they have understood it themselves, despite their own research and ability to learn on their own, which gets harder and harder every year in a world where they can do more learning than they ever have in the past. We should come back to that point, by the way, later, because it's really interesting on implications there. But anyway, so this idea of insight is content designed not to change the way your customer thinks about you, but content designed to change the way the customer thinks about themselves. New ways to make money, save money, mitigate risk in ways that they haven't fully appreciated. Now, we like the word commercial in front of that because I think we'd all agree we don't want to simply be in the free consulting business of just teaching your customers about their business and they think that's great and go put that out to bid and your competitor wins the deal. But how do we teach them about their business in a way that gets them to change their behavior? Because that's what we're selling. We're all selling change. How do we change the way our customers think about their business, gets them to change their behavior in a way that leads back to the unique ways in which we can help them better than anyone else? That's two books in like 2 minutes.
No, that's it's so. Do you have a specific that comes to mind? Maybe not even from the book, but a recent example or anything sort of new of a commercial insight that you've seen that a brand has been able to just so folks can sort of wrap their mind around what this looks like in the real world. You put me on the spot. So let me see. Not because there aren't many of them. I just got to figure out which ones we're like signed off on to tell publicly. So let me do this just for the sake of just keeping us moving forward. I'll pull one out of the book, but I'll do this very briefly because I know some people say, "Oh my God, he's going to tell the Xerox story again." I'd rather dive and hear this one more time. So I apologize for that. But the when you think about just a case we study across 2 chapters in the Challenger customer, is the story of Xerox and what they call their color cube is new technology, new product that they had developed recently. It's a couple of years old now, the story, but there's an amazing technology that allows you to print in color at very low prices, which sounds great. And they think, hey, this thing's awesome. It sells itself, right? And they thought, well, one of the best places to sell this is to school districts. But they go out to school districts and say, we got this color cube, and it allows you to print in color at cheaper prices than you ever thought was possible. And school districts their reaction was, and then this is why it's important that correction I made with you a little while ago. It's not the customer say, we don't care, or that's not interesting, or that's not valuable. They saw the value instantly. It's like, you're right. Oh my God, that is amazing. Those colors are incredible. That would save us, or that would allow us to print in color in ways that we didn't even know were possible at such a lower price. The problem is that they said, and you know what? That's like number 15 on a list of 3 things we can afford to do right now. So it's like we're using black and white right now, and that's not great. But I'll tell you, it's cheaper. And right now, we're quite literally trying to keep the lights on. And we're trying to we're worried about like student safety. And you're telling me about color printing. It's like that's a luxury item in a world where I can barely afford the necessities. And so but notice what happened there. The customer already grants you, they will already stipulate right up front that you've got a world-class product, a world-class solution, and they think it's amazing. They just won't pay you for it because they see it as a nice to have, not a need to have. And so what Xerox realizes, they've got to change the way the customers, now it's not that they had to change the way that customers, these be school districts, teachers, administrators, they don't need to change the way that the customer thinks about Xerox and their new solutions. That was already great. They had to change the way the customer thinks about themselves. And the short version, or the shorter endpoint, I passed short 2 minutes ago, sorry, but is that what they did is they ultimately tied color to student engagement. To student, because that's the thing that those teachers do care about. They care about, are my students engaged in their learning? And it turns out they were able to demonstrate very
credibly that students are far more engaged, particularly given kids these days. Drew, when did we all get old enough to say kids these days? I don't know, but kids these days are far more engaged with color because they, at least if they're like my children, they had an iPad at 2 weeks old. So because I'm a 0.4 father, but they respond more positively to color. And as a result, by putting in a color cube, it's not that you save a couple cents on the dollar for every copy you produce. It's that you actually drive the ultimate outcome, student engagement, that you didn't know was possible through that method. And so teaching the customer something about their organization that leads back to your unique strength.
And right. Okay, so that's part of the keys here is it's a reframing the conversation, because as you talked about, the gain and change has to be pretty substantial. So the gain and change in this very specific example is you'll be able to teach your kids better, which is their ultimate goal.
That's right.
And color will enable that. And here's the proof. And that would lead right back to Xerox because they already liked it. Okay.
Drew, for what it's worth, real quick, just because this is so important. Particularly when I'm talking to sales leaders, but I think just as important for marketers is that, we think all the time we're in the solution selling business, right? It's our job to sell a solution, to market a solution, to demonstrate, to articulate the value of that solution. I think we're all just better off if we think about ourselves, not so much in the solution selling business, but the behavior changing business. And ask how not do we get our customers to buy our solution, but how do we get our customers to change their behavior? Because at the end of the day, we're all selling the same thing. We're all selling change. We're trying to get our customers to stop buying that, start buying this, stop buying the used old stuff, start buying the new stuff, stop DIYing, outsource it to us. One way or another, we're all trying to get our customers to change their behavior, which is the one thing customers left to their own devices want to avoid at all costs. And so now at the end of the day, you still got to get paid for it. That's why it's commercial insight, not just insight. But how do we solve for customers changing their behavior is a far more productive and a better question asked than how do we get our customers to buy our stuff? Because you solve for the first one, you get the second. But if you solve for the second one, you won't actually get the first. Very
cool. I get it. And I think and the CMOs that are with us sort of understand it. It's like, why do you want to change? And so I want to take another break. And then when we come back, I'm going to open the floor to our guests and or not. And I have a lot more questions for you. So stay with us.
You've been listening to another great interview on Renegade Thinkers Unite with Drew Neiser. But the value doesn't end there. As a listener, you can download a free ebook from Drew, Renegade Thinkers, interviews with 11 trailblazing CMOs any business can learn from. Top marketing thought leaders and proven executives from Time Warner, American Express, and Chico's, and others. Get your free copy at renegadethinkersunite.com/ebook. For listeners only at renegadethinkersunite.com/ebook.
Okay, we're back, and my guest is Brent Adamson, and I'm about to open the floor to the live audience here. Any of you want to raise your hand and ask Brent a question on the air? Waiting, don't be shy.
Hi, Connie.
Hi, Connie. So this is Connie O'Brien, the CMO at Tungsten Network. By the way, for listeners, Connie was on episode 54. Go ahead, Connie.
Hey, Brent. Nice to talk to you again. Thanks for having us, Drew. I have two questions. The first is, huge fan of customer insight, but getting that customer feedback, I'm not necessarily in the sales pitch, right? So I'm not necessarily hearing firsthand that information. So how do I work with my colleagues better to get that? That's the first question. It's tied to the second. And the second is, this is really great, but how do I collaborate better with my head of sales, in order to try and get to this place of anything that looks anything like smarketing, even in a fake version? Because, there's tons of videos out there on the web about how sales and marketing don't get along, right? Yeah. How we pick on each other and everything is the other person's fault.
It kind of, to say they're great questions is kind of silly because it's patently obvious. They're just great questions, right? But more importantly, they're important questions. And a couple practical ideas that may or may not solve your particular context, but the organizations that win in this world, I don't know. I don't know that the answer is restructuring or reorganizing, because those things are incredibly disruptive. But at the very least, the answer has to be a common vision of what we're trying to do. And it's hard to say this without feeling like I'm just stating the obvious, I know. But But I've just seen this play out in organization over organization after organization. The reason why the Xerox story is so compelling in many ways that you guys all collectively can't see because we didn't elaborate in the book is the fact that the sales organization was just on board with this idea of commercial insight as the marketing organization was. And so when marketing creates that kind of content and puts it on the website, but then also puts it in the sales tools and puts it in the collateral and puts it in infographics and puts it out through channel partners, everyone understands not just what it's about, but they also understand why. Why is that important? Why do we need to all be on a common or single page of talking about this? And so I find that when I'm sharing these ideas with organizations that have where when I walk away kind of think, all right, they've got a fighting chance of doing something here. It's when I'm talking to sales and marketing leadership collectively. And sometimes all the way up to the COO or the managing director or the GM of the division, or depending on the organization, is that leadership level all the way at the top. You know, when I think of it, like one of the best examples is a company that we work very closely with in the microchip industry, and their journey with all of this started 7 years ago, maybe, with a meeting that I did with their entire executive leadership team, their CEO, their head of finance, their head of HR, their head of sales, their head of marketing, of course, their product leads, the GMs of the product divisions. We're all in a room. There's about 14 of us in a room, and we took 3 hours to go through this stuff. And it's not that they all had to be deeply scrubbed in, but they all had to have the basic understanding at a high level of what this is about, why it matters. And until they all kind of looked around the room and said, yes, this is what we're going to do, which then gives the head of sales and the head of marketing the mandate to go off and make that happen, and everyone understands why they're doing it. It's going to be a struggle. You know, it's funny with Challenger in particular. Everyone's kind of they tend to think of it as a sales methodology, right? I either do spin or I do Challenger. They do lots of sales training, which is great, but that's not what it was ever meant to be. It's a commercial strategy, and strategy is set at the leadership level. And there's certainly things that one can do in marketing around the margins with content or content strategy that I think will always be productive and helpful. But until you get sales and marketing at the leadership level organized, or at least around this common vision, I should say, I just 8 years of doing this, I think it's going to be hard to make a lot of substantive progress. I don't know if that's like it feels kind of like a no done. It may in fact be really frustrating for a lot of listeners right now, because like, well, I can never make that happen. But that's the first thing I would.
Well, if I can just ask, so you said this stuff. So you had this big meeting to talk about this stuff, and this stuff was around commercialization, commercial insight.
Yeah.
Or this stuff was around first collaboration, right? So
it's a great question.
What was this stuff in that particular instance?
So this stuff, it's a great question. Is more it's actually two things. One, it's not change management or collaboration per se. Simply because my expertise doesn't lie there, other than sort of saying, y'all need to collaborate more effectively, and then perhaps facilitating a conversation on how that collaboration might happen. That's not where our expertise lies. So it is more on the target behaviors or the target ideas, so the commercial insight idea itself. But I think more importantly, it's not the what, but the why. It is, why does this matter? Why, if I'm going to come and say, Challenger wins, everyone says, oh, whatever, it's another methodology. It's like, that's not a very productive conversation. Or it's like, you need to disrupt your customers' thinking. Again, it's like, it just sounds like platitudes. I was accused just a week ago of sounding like an academic, which frustrates me, because that's why I left academics, because I didn't sound enough like an academic. But but one way or another, it's the thing I found, Connie, that's perhaps most worthwhile, the best piece of advice I can give anyone, and I've done this with a number of leadership teams, is to not make it about sales or marketing, but rather make it about buying. And Drew, this goes back to your question originally about, so what does this mean for sales and marketing? It's like, I found, whether I'm talking about individual sellers, quota-carrying sales reps, all the way up to leadership, to the degree that you start with the single biggest story in selling and marketing today, and I've said this thousands of times, but I mean it emphatically, the single biggest story in selling and marketing is not how selling is changing or marketing is changing, it's how buying is changing. And I think that's actually the thing that most commercial leaders are missing in B2B. And because we all see it on the B2C side with Amazon and personalization, all that kind of stuff. The dynamics of how it's changing on the B2B side are actually a little bit different and frankly more complex about these the group buying dynamics and the risk aversion, all that kind of stuff. Information is playing a really important role in the last couple of years. We're just now finding and realizing. But to lay out the buying story, here's how buying is changing, here's how we think buying looks like, because then you can hold that up and say, all right, if this is what buying looks like, let's compare it to what selling and marketing looks like, and that's where you begin to see the disconnect. And you kind of let commercial leaders come to their own conclusions, which is, does it feel like your commercial machine is going to be effective in this kind of environment? And so full stop. But I find that's what this stuff is about. It's the buying story.
So I just want to put up on the screen for all of you. This is a slide that the folks at Gartner shared with us, just to give you a sense of how buying has changed. And I don't know, Sam, if you can put that up now. But anyway, the thing that's sort of amazing is that doesn't look like a funnel at all. But what and we're not going to go through this in detail because we couldn't possibly cover it. But there's sort of two conclusions that I always find ironic. One is that this takes forever. A lot of times they don't buy anything at all. Yeah. And even if they buy, they're often unhappy, which is like, whoa, it took you 14 months and 10 people and you're unhappy with the deal. And so buying definitely is broken. Now, Denise Brody, who is, I'm going to unmute you here, or try to unmute you. I think you have to unmute yourself, Denise. There you are. Denise was, Brody is the COO and CMO of Workforce Software. For those of you longtime listeners, she was on episode 43. Denise.
Hi, Drew. Hi, Brent.
Hey, Denise.
Thank you for having us this afternoon. And I'm, having had the blended both COO and CMO role, I really see that the CMO role has been transitioning in the last few years. And having come from a large tech as well as now being in a fast growth tech, what's really interesting is that the traditional CMO job has very much been around, brand to demand. And what I really see it now increasing is brand all the way out to customer happiness and retention. Yeah. And the whole piece around customer experience has been so critical. So, I know in our organization, our COO area that has marketing communications with it also owns customer sat for the entire company. So to be able to come in and look at that data and share that on how do you actually improve that customer satisfaction, or coming in to look at customer success, whether we're going out to do a service request or doing an upgrade for one of our key customers, we're getting a lot of amazing information, right, coming back. So when you look, and I know, Brent, I've heard that you say, hey, you should decouple branding from the CMO job, and who knows where it's going. But I really kind of see that the CMO job extending to what I would say more like a CCO job, right? The Chief Customer Officer, as part of that, and blending that marketing together. What are your thoughts on that?
I think we're actually mostly in agreement. Something I didn't mention to Connie, but for those organizations where we see sales and marketing reporting up into a single commercial leader, they just seem to be more effective at making these kinds of changes happen and just getting things done. It's interesting when I present a lot of our most recent research. I was in London earlier this summer presenting our latest research on helping buyers through this difficult buying journey, and part of the punchline was you're. Just to kind of throw out some really provocative ideas, one of the punchlines for sales leaders is that in this world that we live in today, your sales reps are no longer the channel to your customers. Your sales reps are a channel to your customers, digital being, of course, an alternate or a parallel one, I should say. And of course, sales leaders, you can imagine, they see that as almost an existential threat, right? It's like, whoa, it's like, no, we own the customer. That's our relationship. And so there's a lot of resistance in the room. We talked about it all day long. I think I got many of them around the corner on that. But at the end of the meeting, a general manager from a great big CPG company you guys would all know, he came up to me afterwards. He said, hey, Brent, I'm the GM for EMEA, for the Europe and Middle East area for this big brand. And he said, this seems obvious to me. It's like, why are we even talking about this? Because of course you have to do this. And I was like, and I looked at him and said, you were just in the same room I was. You saw 75 heads of sales tell me that there's no way we're going to do this. And so he would agree with you. I would agree with you. The caveat I would say is, it turns out in all these kinds of changes, storytelling and positioning really matters. And so one of the things I find when talking particularly to heads of sales, they really do see this as almost like an existential threat. So as soon as language starts emerging around marketing is on the rise, or marketing is emerging, or the marketing job is getting bigger, or the marketer should become the chief commercial officer, I don't necessarily disagree at that point. I think I would just phrase it a little bit differently. So it's like, irrespective of sales or marketing, having a commercial organization all report up into a single individual seems to be very effective. Feels a little less threatening to me as a head of sales than marketing should take over and run the whole show, which is not what you're saying, but that's what they're hearing. Do you see what I'm saying? So positioning matters.
Yeah, and I'm by no means advocating for direct sales. Right? What we look at is really the handshake. Our CRO has the sales piece, and what we have is pretty much the beginning and then the end of. It's almost we create the perfect sandwich together.
Yeah, no, which makes a ton of sense. It goes back to the other earlier point, which is collaboration, and not just collaboration, but a common vision. I think you probably agree, Denise, is to make that work is really important. You and your chief revenue officer colleague have to be, I don't know, literally, but you have to be on the same page. Fair?
So I'm going to jump in here, and there's a couple things that, so as we are making buying easier, which is something that I saw you made an entire group of people in the audience repeat after me.
Yes. Make
buying easier. Oh wait, there you are. You're make buying easier, and that was I love that because it simplified it, and what. Sometimes this thing boils down to, and I want to show this chart next, which is it's creating a lot of good, useful stuff. And what I thought was interesting is if you have a commercial insight and you have some of these tools that we're about to show, you actually have this sort of multiplier effect. You can be okay with let's see, these are the tools, right? So I want to ask a couple. These are very in the weeds kind of questions, but they were confusing to me. I get calculator, simulator. Benchmark, those are easy. I understand that. Even recommender, I understand. But when you got to connector, advisor, and diagnostic, can you talk a little bit about those, not in depth, but just what do those things look like?
Sure, I'd be happy to. And you see some of the logos there are actual real examples of each of these that we've put together in a showcase that we share with client members all the time. But I'm going to take a half step back, Drew, if I could, but talk about why we're talking about this in the first place. So that if you think about everything we talked to up to this point, which is commercial insight, changing the way customers think about, not you, but think about themselves, and disruptive insight that drives them to change their behavior. In some ways, you're sort of out of the frying pan into the fire. So we have very convincing, robust data that shows us that there's a huge potential commercial returns to suppliers to do that. But practically speaking, if you get your customers to acknowledge they need to change their behavior, in some ways you've made it actually worse for your customer, not better. Because one of the things we find, again, with all these people and all this information, all this change that needs to happen, it's actually really, really hard. And customers are struggling quite literally, not with what to buy, which they do sometimes, but they're also equally struggling with how to buy. And so parallel to the challenger work is our more recent research, which is all around this idea of what we've come to call buyer enablement, which is if challenger is changing the way your customer thinks about what to buy, then buyer enablement is all about teaching your customers how to buy. Whether you've put them on that purchase journey or they put themselves on that purchase journey, one way or another, we find that just with all the information, all the people involved today, they're ultimately going to wind up pretty overwhelmed, and then that sort of spaghetti bowl diagram of a purchase process that you flashed up on the screen a little earlier. And so there's this huge opportunity. And again, we've got the data behind this to show sort of the size of the opportunity, all that kind of stuff. And it turns out it's even bigger. The opportunity for you as a supplier in terms of commercial returns to you is actually bigger than the opportunity from commercial insight, which is this buyer enablement, which is how can I essentially take the customer by the hand and take them step by step through the purchase journey. Here's what matters. Here's the questions you should ask. Here are the people that are going to be that need to be involved. Here are the obstacles that you're going to run into. Here are the 3 things that everyone else who's bought this solution wishes they had known in advance before they went on the purchase journey. It would have made their lives so much easier. And so that screen that you had up there, the categories. You may have to pull it back up here in a second. Just remind me which ones are in the bottom row, because there's like 4 versions of that I've used. But the one was the diagnostic. Oh, there. Thank you. So a connector. So these are different. The way to think about these is you see that cross stops as meet the tools. They are tools, but think about these as information. So it's information that you could capture in a website, in a white paper, in an infographic, in a piece of sales collateral. It could be delivered through digital, or it could be delivered through a sales interaction. And we know, again, from our data, that customers are just as likely to seek this buying help and buying information through digital channels as they are through in-person channels. So a connector is essentially that. It often takes the form of a buying guide or a step-by-step guide, but it is a set of information or tools that an individual stakeholder can use to identify who else in my organization needs to be involved. Because oftentimes they don't know. It's like, how many times have you lost a deal because you're on the phone with what you thought was a mobilizer, a champion, and they say, it turns out my procurement organization had to sign off on this. Oh, I didn't see that coming. It's like, well, you probably did because you're a supplier and you've sold this thing 10 times in the last 2 weeks, and they're always involved, right? So a connector would be a set of information or tools that guide your customer through who in their own organization needs to be involved. When should they get involved? What questions are they likely to have? How might you address those questions? What objections do you need to overcome? It's all the kinds of consensus wrangling tools that we build for our sales reps, just redesigned, repackaged, reskinned for our customers themselves and deployed through sales reps and digital channels. Likewise, across the bottom, an advisor, you can think of the advisor as sort of the higher level one that captures many of these others. Advisors usually do take the form of a buying guide or a set of steps. So you can think, if you're going to buy this enterprise software system, here are the 5 questions you should ask. That would be a very smally scoped one, or like here's the step-by-step guide on how to make that decision happen in your own organization, be a much broadly scoped one. And finally, diagnostic. Actually, that one's pretty straightforward, but really, really powerful. Everything you see on this page of all these different forms or form factors, as we like to call them, of buyer enablement. Diagnostics are incredibly powerful, and we've got a whole series of best practices on how to build these, design them, deploy them. But a diagnostic, essentially, all it really is a framework. It's a framework that you've created for a segment of customers, a group or a type of customers, that allows that customer organization to diagnose their performance along a set of dimensions that you have determined through some credible form of thinking and doing benchmarking research that helps them identify where are they on a continuum of performance. So maybe you define it as levels of maturity. So we're at maturity level 2 and you want to get to a maturity level 3. And a diagnostic that simply allows multiple stakeholders inside the customer organization to diagnose their performance against that set of metrics that you've identified in the diagnostic exercise, and identify for themselves which level they're in, which level they want to go to next, and the gap that exists that prevents them from making that leap. And as a result, the next steps they'll need to take to overcome that gap. And then when the customer comes back to you and says, I don't know if this is really what we need to do, it seems to me like this data might be off. The neat thing about diagnostics is you can say, well, that's not my data. You're looking at your data. It's you guys' own self-assessment. And then diagnostics done well, you can benchmark yourself against other organizations, all sorts of things like that. But at the end of the day, a diagnostic becomes essentially it's a prioritization tool. It's a consensus creation tool. It gets everyone on the same page of where they should spend their next hour, their next dollar. And it just makes buying easier because it's a way to just get everyone in agreement. It's a great alignment. We run diagnostics for our clients all the time, and we find it's an incredibly powerful tool to just get everyone on the same page on what they're trying to do. So this is a great example of not connecting individual stakeholders to you, but connecting them to each other. And
there's also some part of this is they're not completely agnostic. I mean, in an ideal world, these sort of lead naturally back to, oh, look, in the diagnostic, we just happen to be the perfect solution for this thing because you sort of set up the questions, right?
Absolutely. In fact, a great example of this we profile is you see under the advisor there, Smart Technologies, which is a technology company, collaboration software, hardware based in Calgary, Canada. And Jeff Lowe, the CMO there, Jeff's one of the smartest marketers I've ever met. He's a great guy because he's Canadian, right? But he's got a really neat advisor tool that he's deployed both through sales channels and digital channels. And at one point in the advisor tool, he simply says, at this point, you're probably asking yourself these 5 questions. And I always give him a hard time. It's like, Jeff, what are the odds your customers actually are asking themselves all 5 of those questions? The answer is, slim to none, right? But all 5 of those questions are not only great questions, but some of them are going to just deftly influence customer thinking to lead them to appreciate the kinds of things that Smart can do better than anyone else. But the reaction, and this is so important, the reaction of any of these buyer enablement tools from your customer, it can never be, hey, I see what you're trying to do. They're tricking me into buying your stuff, right? It has to be authentically. I know we all overuse that word today, but authentic, but it really matters. It has to be authentic help. Like, we are truly here to help you. You probably need to be asking yourself these questions. And the reaction you're looking for from your customers, I'm so glad I found this tool. I'm so glad I found this calculator, this diagnostic, this information, because it just made my life so much easier. But in the meantime, if you're leading back to your unique strengths, all the better.
All right. Well, speaking of making lives easier, we've got to wrap up this show because people have shorter commutes than I would like them to do. So they just simply won't be able to finish this episode if we don't wrap up. So first, Brent, thank you so much for being on the show again.
Let's do number 4, Drew. I'm looking forward to it already.
All right. Well, we definitely will. And to all the listeners, and also thank you for the live audience and Connie and Denise for your great questions. If I tried to wrap all of this up, I couldn't, but I would say a couple of things. One, commercial insight is really, to me, something that every brand needs. It's a fundamental thing. I would articulate it differently and talk about it as as a story statement, it really, there is a way of wrapping this up back into marketing language. Buyer enablement, I would put that in this category of marketing as service. Do stuff that helps your customer. We're in the give to get economy. These are things that you give, you get their attention, and hopefully you get their consideration. And then I guess the last thing, just think about this group of 10 and not creating individual pieces, but just anticipating what their needs are going to be, so whoever you are talking to, you can remember to help them help the other folks on the committee decide on you guys. So with that, I will say thank you as always for listening to the show, and until next week, keep those Renegade thinking caps on and strong.
This has been Renegade Thinkers Unite, but it doesn't end there. Just go to renegadethinkersunite.com for more and subscribe to the show. That way, you'll never miss an episode. We'll talk with you next time on Renegade Thinkers Unite.